welcome in everyone to a very special episode of American Joyride. I'm joined today by Jeff Tiegs, a former Delta Force operator who now works in preventing child trafficking, and he is the author of the book, Where Have All the Heroes Gone? Jeff, I could not be more excited for you to be here today.
And I'm a cheesehead. How'd you leave that out? We're two
Oh,
Wisconsin boys.
and we're two Wisconsin guys. You are. I have had a couple Wisconsin guys on the show before. Weird connection, it seems like, in the Tier 1 world. I do have my Badger helmets right behind me, as some people will be able to see. So yes, I am excited whenever I get to see someone from Wisconsin. I don't meet too many of them in DC. So yes, that is an awesome. And to throw another thing in here, we both went to Montana State to tell you how small this world actually is. I didn't
That's
graduate.
crazy.
I didn't graduate from Montana State. I went back to Wisconsin, the University of Wisconsin, but I was there for my freshman year of college. So yes, a very random thing.
Yeah.
um, but anyways, right off the bat, I would like to know, how'd you find yourself in the military? What was kind of the motivation for that? And what brought you to the United States military to serve?
Yeah, I don't know, man. I mean, like I said, I grew up in a suburb of Milwaukee in Wisconsin, a little town called Pewaukee, suburban life, playing guns and army all the time, you know what I mean? And spending late nights crawling through the woods and just, having a good time and watching war movies and all of that. So we all kind of grew up with that sentiment and that attitude. You know what's crazy is when I look back at it, growing up in the 70s and 80s, I just don't remember that much angst. You know what I mean? Like the Vietnam War. I remember my mom and dad coming home after watching Apocalypse Now and being really upset. And I didn't get it. So it's interesting how much of the wars did kind of live around us as young men that we just didn't really understand or recognize. But I think when I got to the end of high school, I just wasn't sure what it was I wanted to do. And it seemed like an adventure. And I just kind of dipped my toe in it. Did initially signed up for a couple of years. I had heard what Rangers were. I didn't know what Rangers were. I knew what Special Forces was, John Wayne and the Green Berets. And when I found out you could get directly into a Ranger unit as a private, that's what I decided to try to do. Little did I know how difficult that would be and how life-changing that would be. So I signed up for 4 years, ended up doing 5 because I extended for scuba school and some other things as a young Ranger. And then ended up having a break in service and went to school and then came back in. I don't know how I found myself in the military, but it is there that I recognize I'm just a soldier. Even today, as I sit with you, much older man, no longer wearing a uniform, I definitely, if I had to pick one word to describe myself, soldier would be pretty close. I mean, I think defender, protector are probably closer, but I'm just a soldier. There are no two ways about it.
I love the humility in that. That's very well said. When you joined, did you join with the goal of hopefully going to combat, or was it a peacetime military at that point? Was there any thinking of that in your mind?
It was weird because the first Ranger battalion that I went to, they had a history. I mean, when you go there, you learn the history. The Rangers in the United States go all the way back to Rogers Rangers in the French and Indian War and the Revolutionary War and the Civil War and this storied history of the Rangers during World War II, and then the Ranger companies and the long range reconnaissance units in Vietnam. So you really begin to learn this warfare history that I didn't know about. I came in '87. The last time the unit had seen combat was in '83 in Grenada, and you revered those men that we lost. I mean, we honored them almost daily. So it was. I don't think coming in as a kid out of high school, I didn't think about war, but you started to train for it. And I mean, we literally begged for it. We literally prayed for war. And then when it was thrust upon us in 1989, just cause when the United States decided to invade Panama and oust Noriega and his henchmen, it took us by surprise. And then we wanted more. And then Desert Storm kicked off, and there really wasn't a great integration of SOF into Desert Storm. I think that was a big miss on what those capabilities were. And we could talk about that all day on, the government understanding, recognizing it, Schwarzkopf, all those types of things. but it was something we constantly trained for. So I think, again, I'm looking at the football helmets behind you. I think when you train every single day and put your heart and soul into something, you really want to be tested. So we really wanted to be tested. Um, but then I would also say, after 9/11, and we've had decades of constant war, it's one of those things, be careful what you ask for. The Super Bowl is pretty cool once a year, but if you got to do it every week, that can get a little taxing.
Were you involved with Just Cause in '89? Did you go to Panama?
I did. Yeah. So it's funny because I was a corporal, I was a team leader, and we were training up for it, but you don't really understand. Again, when I went to, I think it was the 20-year anniversary of the Panama invasion, I went to this briefing and it was all us old timers, and I see a map, and it was the very first time that I realized the airfield we jumped in on, called Tacumen, was absolutely on the other side of the country of Rio Hato, where a Second Ranger Battalion jumped. Because when we did rehearsals, you were in Florida doing the rehearsals, and we jumped there, and so in my mind's eye, the other battalion wasn't that far away. And then on the day of combat, when you're doing your fighting and you're hearing this other fighting, I'm thinking it's a whole nother battalion. Well, it must have been another platoon or company. You just didn't understand the scale and scope of it, or even the strategy, right? Like, I had no idea that we were marching towards war. We were just training and training. I'm a 20-year-old corporal. I've got 4 dudes that I need to have ready, and we had just completed a full rehearsal in Florida, like a full mock-up. So I think if I would have been a little smarter, I would have recognized that, hey, we were on the precipice of something. But we had block leave. You only get block leave at Christmas once every 3 years, because it would rotate between the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Ranger battalions. So we had Christmas block leave, and my wife, Julianne, who we were married, we got married that year in April. We were going home to have a public wedding in December. So I was focused on one thing: Christmas and getting married. And when the phone call came on that Sunday night, and I don't know if you'll remember this at all. You're much younger than I am. It was the Simpsons Christmas special. It was an hour-long special of the Simpsons, and it was like the first time the Simpsons had like a premiere thing. And back then you had the 3 or 4 TV stations. So I mean, the entire country sat down to watch the Simpsons Christmas special. And the phone rings, and it's my squad leader. He gives us the alert notification. I kiss my wife goodbye and head into work, having no idea where we're going or what it is we're up to. And then a couple days later, I find myself jumping out of an airplane and landing in Panama.
When your feet hit the ground coming out of that plane, or maybe even before your feet hit the ground, and the parachute's deployed and you're coming down, you got your weapon, you got your ammo, your guys are hopefully around you. Do you remember what you were thinking falling through the air?
Oh yeah, exactly. Because it's not like you just described it. There was nobody around me. So it was pretty dicey. So you're coming in on the aircraft, and it was raining when we left Hunter Armour Airfield. So we were soaking wet. And then you're in these aircraft, and you're wet and you're cold. And as you're coming in, the aircraft started to take fire. So they were bobbing and weaving. I have terrible motion sickness to begin with, but the movement of the aircraft, you just wanted to get out. Like all of us were just get us out of here, And you're waiting. You're standing in the stick. The doors open up, and you can feel that warm Caribbean air come in, and you're waiting for the light to turn green. So people that don't know, this is me holding a static line. If you don't know what this is there's a line connected to my parachute, and it's on a cable, and you walk, and you hand it to the jump master, and you jump out the door. So as you're walking, you wait for the light to turn green, and you start hustling and hustling, hustling. And I didn't realize it at the time, but there were men in the aircraft getting shot. Guys were falling down. And I thought, this is ridiculous. How many times have we trained to jump? Now's the time you decide to trip and fall in front of everybody. But we just stepped over them and jumped out the door. And as soon as I hit the wind, it was very, very warm. I saw A-10s like at eye level, and I was shocked. I'm like, oh my goodness, there's an airplane, a jet. and your chute opens almost immediately. And I'm trying to orient myself. And this goes back to what I was saying before. I didn't know where I was because everything on the mock-up, an airplane hangar was maybe a 20 by 20 plywood building that we created in the rehearsal. You know what I mean? So in the air, I could see the entire objective during training, during the rehearsal. But when I jumped out, I'm looking around like, I don't know where I am. What's happening? And there's bullets flying, there's tracers, there's red and green tracers, and they're bouncing all over the place. And I'm even thinking to myself, now I'm controlling there. This is me doing controlling the parachute. I'm thinking, what color are our tracers? Are they red or green? Are these people shooting at me? What's happening? And that was about all I thought. And then you hit the ground because you jumped from very, very low. And as soon as you hit the ground, everything becomes quiet because there's this giant elephant grass that's around you. And you hear gunfights happening around you and you see bullets flying around, but you are all alone. And I think it's interesting because I've talked to old World War II veterans as well, even like D-Day, as big as that was, when you land in the dark in the woods or in a field, it's very quiet. And even if a guy's 30 meters away, nobody's saying anything, so you feel very, very alone. And then I policed up my stuff, and as a team leader, my job was to get to that assembly area, get a team ready, and go get the foothold that we needed. And it was interesting because we had been practicing it, but I was really wondering who was going to be there. Because as soon as you had, I think it was 6 to 8 men and a machine gun, you were heading out to take the foothold of this building. And you're used to fighting with your guys. So as I'm moving to the assembly area, I'm thinking, man, I sure hope my guys show up because I don't necessarily want to have my first gunfight with dudes I really don't know. And then we had these clickers. So I think that was similar to what they had in D-Day. It was a little clicker that you would click as a near recognition signal. And then we also had a running password that was Bulldog. So as I'm running to the assembly area and there's all these gunfights happening around me and I'm making the decisions of, should I go get in a gunfight? Do they need my help? Or what's my job? You're constantly trying to figure out what should I be doing right now? There's so much happening. Should I go with the plan? You know what I mean? Or should I bend to what I see happening around me? And then you get this kind of, I got at least this somewhat paranoid feeling of, everyone's watching me and there's someone to come get me. And I started just yelling, not yelling, but saying Bulldog. So I think every time my left foot hit the ground, it was almost like a cadence. I was like, Bulldog, Bulldog, Bulldog. And then finally I heard someone else say Bulldog, and that changed everything. I mean, it's, you hear people talk about it, man, fighting alone sucks. Fighting with one other guy is a world of difference, So I don't even remember who it was that I linked up with. I don't think I knew him. But now I at least had a buddy. And by the time I got to the assembly area, there weren't many guys there. And within probably just a handful of minutes, I had the team that I needed to go, and we headed on out.
Man, I wish people knew more about Panama because what you just described could have been in the Band of Brothers episode where they jump into D-Day. Guys are getting shot in the plane. They had the clicker. They said grasshopper.
Yeah.
And they wanted to alert each other where they were. That's nuts. I did not realize. When I interviewed a former teammate of yours at the unit who was also in Panama, he described a very chaotic scene as well. In fact, he said that he saw a body drop from a rooftop that the guy behind him had shot. He missed the guy. The guy was looking right down at him, and someone behind him, and he's like, I'm lucky to be alive because that guy had me dead to rights. I didn't even see him. But Panama seems to be this thing that everyone just kind of, especially young people, maybe my age, just completely breeze over like it never even happened. And the other thing I'd bring up is Operation Acid Gambit. When they got Kurt Muse out of the prison, that's one of the most incredible rescue missions imaginable. Most people have no idea that even happened.
Yeah. And as a Ranger Corporal, I had no idea it happened. I had no idea what else was going on. And it is funny because I find myself talking more about Panama than most other events. One, it's because like by the time you get to Delta, man, it is so sophisticated. I mean, it is like it's like the most high-speed movie stuff you can imagine. Like, it's almost hard to describe. But the Panama thing, like you said, it's kind of the warfare people understand. You know, you parachute in, you do this, you do that. You know, one of the things that's funny when you talk about it was forgotten. I finally came home end of January or something like that. Needless to say, my wife and I did not have our wedding. So here's a little piece. Um, my wife didn't know where we were going, you know, and how I found out what we were doing, it was on CNN. So I say this often, like the media isn't that different than it ever has been. They've never really been on our side, right? They want the scoop. So we came in off of this alert and we were getting all of our gear ready. And we were like, where are we going? I don't know. What are we doing? Flip TV on, CNN saying, hey, the 82nd Airborne and the Ranger Battalions have been alerted and are planning to invade Panama. I think this was like Monday, and we didn't jump in until Tuesday, you know? So the intel reports were coming in. The Panamanians knew we were coming, and they started reinforcing the drop zone and tearing up the airfield. And they had a good 24, 48 hours of building a solid defense because the Western news media tipped them off, you know? So when we actually went, I think my wife said they called all the wives into the chapel and said, initially that it was a training exercise. You know what I mean? Like, don't worry, it's a training exercise. And then it's on TV, and some wife raises her hand and she's like, what is this bullshit? It's on TV. And then they were like, oh, give us a minute. And they come back and are like, okay. Your husband's just spearheaded the invasion into Panama. So what had happened for me was I hadn't talked to my wife from Sunday night, which I think was whatever day that was. And we were supposed to be married on the 24th of December. And so Monday we were supposed to go on leave, et cetera, et cetera. So in the lull of the fighting, we were going through a barracks, and we hit this day room, which is there's a bar and there's a refrigerator and there's a disco ball, and it's the room where the soldiers just chill. We have them, they had them, and I saw a phone, and I said, hey, hold up here, guys, hold up here a second, and I picked up the phone and I called my wife, Colette, and I said, honey, I don't really have a lot of time to talk, but you need to call my mom and let her know there's not going to be a wedding. Like if you don't know where we are, you're going to find out real soon. You need to call my mom. So again, people don't think of this back in 1989. So Jules calls my mom, and my mom does her best to cancel the wedding, but there was no email. It was, we had push button phones and answering machines, but that was about the only technology. My mom still had the rotary phone that, you know what I mean? You know what I mean? That joke that says, any friend who had a 9 or a 0 in their phone number, you just got rid of them. It was too hard to give them a call. So people came to the church still. They didn't get word that it was canceled. People came to the reception still. They hadn't got word that it was canceled. So it seems like such a different time, almost World War II type stuff, right? And then finally, when I did come home in January or February, I remember seeing some friends, and I asked a girl that I had gone to high school with. She asked me what I had done for Christmas. I said, oh, no, I was in Panama. I didn't really have a Christmas. And it went right over her head. And she said, oh, I love Panama City. That's my favorite place to do spring break. And it was the first time that I realized this disconnect, right? Like this world that I live in and the world that the rest of America lives in. And I'll admit there were times I was resentful, especially, going back and forth to war. Like when people lost their appetite for Afghanistan, when people lost their appetite for Iraq, when people don't even understand these other things that we're doing. And I'd come home and I'd see a yellow ribbon on a tree or a yellow ribbon on a pole. I sometimes I got resentful because people just went about their day, But now that I'm a little bit older, I'm glad and proud that we live in a country that we can send men and women to war and still have a peaceful life where everything just kind of runs itself. And that's what it was. I mean, I was back and forth to war from 2003 until I retired in 2015, probably half the time at war. So you just kind of get used to it.
That is everything about this. We're only 20 minutes into this and it's already blown me away. I mean, the Panama stuff, what you just said about the kind of viewing people going about their lives. And that reminds me, because you said 2015. I'm gonna make a note here right at the end. Because that just popped a question. I don't want to give it away, but it's important
Okay.
for that timeline. So Panama's over. You said he had a break in service. Is that when you were going? Is that when you were in Bozeman?
Yeah. So when I went to the Rangers is when I heard about Delta Force. I had never, I'm not sure if I've ever told this story before on a podcast, but I think we were in Fort Campbell, Kentucky training. And the Rangers they're a top tier unit, right? And we're at a machine gun range, heavy weapons range. And I get the call over the radio that says, "Hey, you got to shut down your range. We got a priority unit coming in for an hour." And I'm like, who's a priority unit? What? Who's trumping this Ranger sergeant? And this black helicopter lands, and a bunch of these older dudes get out. And I'm telling you, man, they're dressed exactly like the Chuck Norris Delta Force movie. They got jeans on, different boots, the black dyed, military jacket. The only thing they didn't have was that rope, the black watch cap on their head. And they get out and they got a bunch of duffel bags and they pull out all these grenade launchers, these M203 grenade, all these exotic grenade launchers. They land, like 4 or 5 guys get out. They pull out all this ammo. They shoot these rounds. There's a guy, they're like taking notes, and they're like, "Hey, thanks a lot, man. Really, really appreciate the time." And they get back on a helicopter and leave. And I'm sitting there going, who the hell was that? And then that's the very first time I heard about, oh, that's Delta Force. That's the D boys. And that's when I realized, well, geez, man, I thought I was like the top of the food chain here with the Rangers. I want to do that, Again, little did I know I had been in combat with them, peripherally supporting them, etc. So that was what I set my sights on, was to go to Delta Force. And I couldn't get in with the wavered eyes. My eyes were not correctable. I've since had the surgery and all of that and became Delta worthy. So I became kind of that bitter, angry young man who couldn't get his way. You know what I mean? And that really precipitated me getting out. I wanted to be Delta. The Army wouldn't let me. I was like, forget it. I'll go do something else. But I just didn't find that something else. My heart and soul just wanted to be a soldier, Ranger, and Special Forces, and then Delta.
So when you have that break of service and you come back in, you go Green Berets for a little bit.
Yeah. So I stayed in the reserves, in the reserves while I was in school. Ended up doing ROTC, and you'll appreciate this too. So when I went to high school, I was a good runner in high school, but not great, and I had a couple of dudes in my class that were faster. And then University of Wisconsin, when it comes to distance running, I mean, that was half the Olympic team was on the University of Wisconsin. So I thought collegiate racing was way up here. So when I got out of the military and was training and running, and I first went to University of North Carolina, Wilmington, that's where I started, and then transferred out to Montana State. So when I remember going to the coach and saying, "Hey, I'm a runner. I'm trying to break into triathlons." I was kind of an amateur triathlete at the time. I said, "Do you have space for people to train with you?" And he said, "Yeah, come on out. Come on out to our tryout." And I end up like taking second or third and walk on to the team. And then I ended up transferring out to Montana State and running out there, track and cross country. So growing up, my only knowledge of collegiate running was University of Wisconsin, the top 1 or 2 running schools in the country. There's there's a lot of space for journeyman runners like me. So I think that saved me to be able to compete and put all my energy and focus into something else. So I went from a team in the military to a team in running and racing, and that wholehearted commitment. But again, it was always tugging at me to come back and just continue to develop soldiers and see what else I could master.
What year is it when you fully reintegrate back into the military? Do you remember?
1997. So I
Okay,
got
so
commissioned in 97. So yeah, from 92 to 97, I ended up doing 5 years because collegiate athletics, you get that red shirt year. So I commissioned 97 and went back to 2nd Ranger Battalion and served as a lieutenant up there.
So, but the reason I asked that, it's before 9/11. So let's fast
It
forward a
was.
little bit to
Yeah,
9/11. Do you remember where you were when 9/11 happened, and what was your job at that point in time?
I was. I remember. So I had just completed the captain's career course. So I was a lieutenant and captain in the Second Ranger Battalion, a brand new captain. And now you have to decide what you're going to do next. And I decided to go with Special Forces. So as a captain, you are qualified to try out for Special Forces. So you have a captain's career course, which you learn the tactics and strategy at that level, down at Fort Benning, Georgia. And then you went to this staff course at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. So I was sitting in this staff course, which was boring as all get out. And it was, I don't remember how many weeks long. And that's when 9/11 happened. So I definitely felt like a fish out of water. Like watching those Rangers jump into Afghanistan and seeing and hearing about my mates that were already in the fight, that was painful. But I had a road that I had to travel first. So from that staff course is when I ended up going to selection and the Q course for Special Forces. So from a 9/11 until almost a little more than a full year later, I was in Special Forces qualification course, getting up to speed and trying to set my chips on where do I need to go to get into the fight. And it was 10th group. I mean, it was 10th group and 5th group. 5th group because they had that region of the country, and 10th group because they still had leftover relationships from Desert Storm with the Kurds. So after Desert Storm ended, we had this years of relationship called Provide Comfort, where we supported the Kurds, had that demilitarized no-fly zone between Iraq and those and the adjoining countries. So there was relationships there. So it was 5th group or 10th group. I've always loved the mountains. Fort Carson in Montana, Fort Carson in Colorado is very much like Montana. So I set the conditions to get to 10th group, and I wasn't there but a few months, and then we were off to Iraq.
So did you ever deploy to Afghanistan with 10th group, or you went straight to your first deployment was to Iraq?
My first deployment was to Iraq. So we were on the ground prior to the war up in Kurdistan, setting the conditions, doing SF stuff. Um, and then I was on rotations to Iraq all the way from 2003 until I went to Delta in 2005. I only went to Afghanistan a couple times with Delta, so I never really picked up an affinity for the country or the people. When I was with Delta, it was all very much direct action counterterrorism ops. We had a few Afghans that were with us just so we could say the Afghans were there, but I never really got to know or understood the Afghan people like I did the Iraqis and the Kurds.
Let me dig into that real quick because you're talking about setting the conditions for the invasion of Iraq. So the invasion starts, technically, the history books say March 20th, but I believe
Yeah,
Delta operators crossed the berm from Saudi Arabia on March 19th.
yeah,
Yeah, I believe that's public record, obviously, at this point. What is 10th group? What's their role once the actual invasion kicks off and the war is underway? What was your unit's job?
yeah. So even before the war kicked off, we began to infiltrate into Kurdistan. So we were coming in by land and air and mobilizing the Kurdish Peshmerga. So the plan, and this is all in the history books, the plan was for 10th group to kind of open a northern front to tie down the units, the units that Saddam had up in the north, so they couldn't reposition, and to secure those oil fields and to really get the northern front taken care of, so that the actual attack that was coming from the south, again crossing the berm, didn't have to worry about reinforcements and all of that. So we were literally handfuls of men with thousands and thousands of Kurds, Peshmerga warriors, mobilizing them and getting them all set up. So we were equipping them, we were training them, we were trying to get their logistics set up. And I remember sitting in Kurdistan, like when the war kicked off, and that like someone had to tell us, oh, the war kicked off. And then I don't remember what day the 173rd Airborne actually jumped into Bashur Airfield, but we were sitting there in lawn chairs as they jumped in. I mean, it was we had set up the DZ and there were Peshmerga, everything was secured. And then once they hit the ground, things began to accelerate. And again, it's one of those things that when I think of warfare, it's almost easier to talk about that because it was linear. There was a front. There was an Iraqi front line of trenches and artillery, and and when we approached them by fire and maneuver, like people would understand and recognize, it wasn't as dynamic as complex as things definitely evolved into.
I've interviewed a handful of guys from C Squadron in Delta, and they said when they rolled into Iraq, they essentially just crushed. I mean, they just rolled through. There's obviously that famous April 2nd engagement where they fought the Fedayeen, but for the most part, they never faced any resistance that they couldn't crush. With your unit, when you were 10 Special Forces Group, what type of resistance were the Iraqis able to mobilize?
Not much at all. So keep in mind what I was involved in up there was very much front line. Like there was a forward line of troops, their forward line of troops, and these poor men that were in this trench, they were conscripts, man. Like,
Right.
and we softened them up with B-52 bombers. You know what I mean? Stealth bombers. I mean, it really what we were trying to do was get them to quit. So we were prepared to fight, and we did fight, but by and large, we were there to demonstrate the air power, reinforced with what we were able to mobilize on the ground to say, hey, your best bet is just to surrender. That was when I learned the word capitulate. You just need to capitulate. And it was funny because that's what we were doing even before the war started. Is you'd be in this Kurdish village, and you'd be sitting here drinking tea and eating bread with the guy, and he'd call his buddy who was the Iraqi colonel. They had known each other, they had coexisted, and he'd basically saying, hey man, I'm here with the Americans, and tomorrow you need to surrender, and this is what surrendering looks like. And if you don't surrender, they're going to drop a whole shit ton of bombs on your head, and it just isn't going to be good. And they would negotiate, and you're like, all right, and I had money. We jumped in, landed. We landed with $8 million. I had $4 million in a backpack, and a friend of mine, Joe, he had $4 million in a backpack, and we were there to buy off the Iraqi army, so we didn't have to fight. So we would negotiate. Hey, how much is it going to cost for you to surrender? And I shit you not, man. Some of these guys would go for a couple packs of smokes. Because they were, we'd start at a couple packs of smokes, and then it would go up to hundreds of thousands of dollars or $1 million for a regiment, and like you were describing with some of these other guys you talked to, when we broke through that front line, it just collapsed. And there were just thousands of Iraqi men in uniform, out of uniform, walking in their underpants, just on the highway, walking south. Because one of the things that Saddam had done was the people that were fighting in the north were from the south. They were like from Basra and south of Baghdad. So it was far enough away where his thinking was they're not going to what do you call it when they defect or whatever, that they weren't going to leave because it was so far to get to their homes. But while that made sense in one area, they just had no affinity. Like they were down from Basra. They're sitting up here in the mountains of Kurdistan. Like it didn't connect. So I remember driving from when we broke through the lines finally into Kirkuk and Mosul. We're in white Toyota Hiluxes or Land Rovers, and there's just thousands of men. And once again, now I'm going back to like when I was a corporal. You're like, what do we do? Like this is our enemy. Like these guys were shooting at us 20 minutes ago. There were tanks idling on the side of the road, There were rocket vehicles with still rockets in the tube, artillery that still was primed with artillery shells in it. I mean, it was minutes, but quickly humanity takes over, and it's just like, hey man, good luck, and we were on to the next thing. And then though, so that's March, right? March, April. By June, some of us in special forces, because we had relationships with the locals, were beginning to understand, oh, that was easy, but it ain't over. They've gone to ground. And even some of those officers that we bought off in the north we ended up fighting them again, you know, in Tikrit, in Beji, and in Baghdad, you know. So they were very, very clever in not going head to head against the Americans and disappearing into the populace and then creating this insurgency. And I'll pause there because I'm talking a lot, but I definitely want to share something with you that I don't know if anyone has ever talked about. So that's my teaser, but I'll break for something. Yeah, anything you've got.
Well, no, because you just brought up the insurgency, and I know that you said you got to Delta in 2005, but because you brought up the insurgency, a lot of our younger viewers have probably never heard the name Zarqawi, who
Yeah,
was the face of evil for Al-Qaeda in Iraq. Obviously, he gets killed in 2006, shortly about a year after you get to the unit. But did you have any experience with dealing with either Zarqawi or on the peripherals of his people? Because my understanding is Zarqawi's tradecraft and ability to avoid detection was top of the line. Is that
yeah,
true?
yes. So good segue. And yes, that was one of the very first things I witnessed in the unit was the Zarqawi. And Tom DiDamasso was the squadron commander who was responsible for that. And Tom is an American hero. He can be your third Delta Force officer to talk to. Tom was in Black Hawk Down as a Ranger lieutenant, but Delta Force was very much a direct assault, like you know, hitting ops. Tom was one of the first guys, and this people may think differently, but I think a lot of the folks would agree. Tom was one of those first guys in the intel people that he had with him who was like, look, we have to have this thing strike to develop or develop to strike. Like we just can't hit and just capture, kill everybody. If we want to get to Zarqawi, we're going to have to be a little bit more patient, and we're going to have to like have the night of the long knives where we let some things sit, you know, and on one night we go out and we bang 20, 30, 40 targets, you know, because we're plucking these guys off the battlefield one by one, two by two. Zarqawi keeps kind of, you know, slipping away. So it was a heavy lifting for a squadron commander to tell the unit commander or the JSOC commander all the way up to the presidential level, like, hey man, we're going to have a little bit of a lull in operations because I think it's going to lead to Zarqawi. And I had broken my leg in the operator training course. So I was actually downrange as a nobody. I was a battle captain working in the op center, just kind of observing and learning. And that was one of the very first things that I observed and learned was like, oh, this is what a Delta Force officer does. You know what I mean? He's not needed on the fight, right? Like once you blow the door or blow the gate or you're on the target, there's very little room for that officer. The officer is the one who's sitting there and looking at the tactics and the strategy and integrating that for the most impact and effects. And that's how we finally ended up getting to Zarqawi. So what I wanted to mention was people know ISIS, right? People know ISIS, Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. Well, before ISIS was the Islamic State of Iraq, just ISI, which people have already forgotten. And people don't know where ISIS or ISI came from. So when this insurgency grew with Zarqawi out of Fallujah and it spread, it was called Al-Qaeda in Iraq, AQIZ.
AQI.
AQI, AQIZ, AQI. And Zarqawi and bin Laden were butting heads quite a bit because bin Laden was like, hey man, like you're taking this a little too far. You know what I mean? Like this is, you know, even the way that he was doing it and all this kind of stuff. And that was stuff that we constantly monitored. You know, we constantly monitored these elements, Ansar al-Sunnah, Al-Qaeda in Iraq, the big Al-Qaeda, you know, all these different terror elements. We were constantly monitoring them communicating with each other because when they came together and aligned, now you've got 2, 3, 4 times the danger, right? So we were constantly trying to pull out killing a guy who was trying to unify. You know what I mean? So those guys would come right to the top of our list. So that was something that was always interesting when people wonder, like, what were you doing in Delta Force in Iraq? Well, we were one of the things we were doing was ensuring that all of these separate terror organizations weren't uniting. We were causing dissension between them. We were killing and capturing the ones that we needed to. We were trying to turn them against each other. It was a great game. It wasn't just banging doors and shooting guys in the face. That was a heavy part of it. But there was a great game that we followed on these relationships and how they were communicating and who was saying what to each other. And when Al-Qaeda in Iraq started to lose support of the people, because the Iraqi people were saying, hey, what's going on? Like we're bearing the brunt of all of this. This is Al-Qaeda. Like Zarqawi is Jordanian. He's not Iraqi. Like Al-Qaeda is not Iraq. Like this is Al-Qaeda in Iraq began to lose public support. So the insurgency was dropping. And Zarqawi, to his credit, created out of thin air the Islamic State of Iraq, ISI. And it really didn't exist, but he put a name on it. So now it wasn't Al-Qaeda in Iraq, this separate international organization that wasn't looking for the best interest of Iraq. He just renamed it ISI. And he put this guy in charge named Abu al-Baghdadi, which again, people have begun to know that name. Well, dude, for a better part of a year, there was no guy. It was fake. So the Abu al-Baghdadi that would be on the radio, and he had a beautiful voice, that was a guy. And we killed that guy. But it wasn't Baghdadi. The guy that would come on TV was very handsome, and we killed that guy. And it wasn't Baghdadi. The guy that would communicate back and forth tactically to the troops, we killed that guy, and it wasn't Baghdadi. The guy that would communicate strategically to Al-Qaeda and the other insurgents movements around the world, that was a different guy, and we killed that guy. So this al-Baghdadi character was 5, 6, 8 different people that Zarqawi all created into this thing to build support for his movement until finally they settled on a guy, al-Baghdadi. And he basically turned the tide from Iraqis not believing in what Al-Qaeda was doing. It was rebranded to ISI, and suddenly they were all about it again. And we watched all of this happen right underneath our nose, and we tried to keep up with it, and we tried to counter all of that propaganda. But it was just, it happened too quick.
At Zarqawi's peak before his death in 2006, is it fair to say that the government cared more about killing him than bin Laden at that point in time?
Oh, hands down. Yeah, hands down. And I think this was one of those things. I mean, when I was in the unit, I never once was looking for bin Laden. You know what I mean? I'm not saying we weren't looking for him, but we had him in a box. This is the way I understand it. And if you talk to other people, we had him in a box. He was very, very marginalized. And then our fear also was his second in command, Zawahiri, was much more capable. So it was like with bin Laden in the picture and Zawahiri kind of relegated to, the VP, to the 2YC, we were able to kind of keep control of this. And I think that's where you saw, excuse me, all of these other Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb, AQAM, Al-Qaeda in Iraq, turn into ISIS, all these things. I think that's where you were seeing these rebranding and this fractioning, because it was very, very difficult for bin Laden to control what was happening globally. So I don't know this for sure, because it really never came up. It was never something that I was involved in, but I do remember the discussions internal in the team room of why aren't we going after this guy? And it really it's just symbolic, we're best off the way that the situation kind of lays. But then there was always that moral win, like, hey, but he still needs to get his, and I think even when that did happen, it was interesting to see just how the country had this sigh of relief. I think I underestimated just how much that guy did live as a boogeyman in our conscience. If I had it all to do over again and I was in charge, I think I would have gone after him harder earlier. But we were definitely looking at the 20-meter target, which was Al-Qaeda in Iraq, the burgeoning terrorism and insurgency in Syria, what was happening in North Africa, et cetera, et cetera.
This is all unbelievably fascinating. To tie Zarqawi and Bin Laden, and then I want to kind of rewind a little bit to your process into the unit. You know, obviously SEAL Team 6 got Bin Laden in Pakistan and Abbottabad, and they put together what they viewed was like the 23 best operators from what Red Squadron. They called it an all-star team, and that publicly and in books has been very clear. Like that all-star idea of we're just going to pick the 23 all-stars fractured that squadron because the guys who didn't get picked were like, what? We're not good enough. In the unit, I interviewed a guy from the unit and he talked about how like the idea of an all-star team would never happen. Like when you get to a squadron, it's like you're all capable. Do you agree? Like, does Delta have the all-star team, or if you're on a squadron and your number gets called, you're just going?
Yeah. I think you told me when we get to the end of this discussion, we're going to talk a little bit about
We
SEAL
will.
Team 6 and
We
Delta.
will.
And I think that speaks volumes, right? You have an important mission and you have to pick the best of the best out of your organization because you're not confident in who you have, as your everyday bench. It would never happen in the unit. And again, I say it somewhat tongue in cheek. Like, to me, that is a serious indictment on an organization that you feel like your organic troop or your organic squadron doesn't have what it takes to get a premier mission. So we would never even think of that. Now what I will say is there is a lot of personality. One of my jobs as an officer was to sell our capabilities, our troop, our squadron. So it's funny because when people think about the military and they're like, oh, the president told them to do that. Man, the president's not telling us to do anything. We're telling the president what we think needs to be done. It's a very, very different relationship. If you're talking about Obama or Biden or Bush or Trump or whomever, like you're briefing them and their people like, hey, this is the number one bad guy. These are the conditions. And you basically establish this contract. So you write a con op and it basically has the conditions where it's like, if we can identify this guy and isolate him with these parameters, are you going to give us the approval to launch? So that's constantly in motion, and I knew the Bin Laden stuff was brewing because that contract was signed, so to speak. Like there with the contract with the Obama administration was kind of signed that said, if you guys are able to isolate him under these conditions, X, Y, and Z, and that's what we were constantly doing. I had some missions that were very, very sensitive, very contentious. And as the assault commander, it was my job to say, okay, if we can match these conditions, do you give us the go ahead? So it's not like the president ever wakes up and is like, I want you to go get Bin Laden. It's building, just like the Zarqawi thing, where it's like, hey, here are the 8 things we need. We call them triggers. These are the 8 triggers that we need met. And when we meet those triggers, you're going to say launch. And that's how it works. So it's a very, very different relationship. Where was I going with that? So I think that's one of those things that I think people don't recognize and realize is the president, even the National Security Council, they are taking your input. They're taking your advice. You're telling them what we can and can't do and what that cost would come at.
That is unbelievably fascinating to me because most people, like you said, they would think like, oh, it comes down like Biden picks up a phone, issues an order, and then all of a sudden these guys just disappear. But I do want to walk this back just a little bit to kind of, because that was all incredible, but I want to go back to kind of how, as an officer, when you go to selection, is it the same pipeline? Like you're in selection, OTC, just like if you're a regular, I don't want to say regular because it diminishes, but like an operator, is it the exact same thing?
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that makes the unit what it is is every NCO there knows I went through the exact same thing. I went through the exact same selection course. In fact, there's a little bit of added bonus that officers go through that NCOs don't have to. And then even in the operator training course, that year of training, you're doing the exact same thing. You're in the house clearing. If you're not staying with the stack, if you're not safe, if you're not clearing, you're booted. So as an officer, if you're not good in the house, you're getting booted, even though it really isn't my job, but that's the expectation. It isn't until the last week or two of the operator training course where you're actually expected to be an officer and they're giving you responsibility. Otherwise, you're kind of the guy back in the stack. And it's I would say it's a little bit easier as an officer, so to speak, because they're not as heavily evaluating you. Like I was never the breacher, right? I never put the charge on the door, because that's an officer is never, I shouldn't say never, but I wasn't evaluated at that, right? Because that was a guy when he crossed the hall, that was going to be his job. His job was that. So you were kind of a support element all through that time. And again, like I was talking about earlier with the Zarqawi event, because I was downrange in between operator training courses, my first experiences with Delta was as a number 5. So in the teams, you've got the team leaders of 1, the assistant team leaders of 2, 3, 4, 5. You're supposed to have 5 guys on a team. And because I was a battle captain in the talk, running the talk, when I wasn't working that, troops invited me out to just be an assaulter. So I held ladders. I was in the stack. So as I finished the operator training course, or even before I finished the operator training course, I worked as a Delta Force assaulter for a trip and really got to see the inside baseball of how it all worked. And again, I think that's a testament to the training, right? Like no Delta Force Sergeant Major is going to be like, "Hey, Major, why don't you come and get into a gunfight with us?" If they didn't know, I was up to speed because I had been through the exact same things that they had been through.
In your mind, what makes a great Delta Force assaulter operator compared to, like you're just saying, you're not going to be expected to be laying breach charges. So what makes a great assaulter versus a great officer? Like if you were evaluating, this is what makes an assaulter A+, this is what makes an officer A+, what would those characteristics be?
Wow, that's a good question. I think it's probably layered. So you have to know the tactics enough. You have to know what your guys can do and can't do, right? And this was interesting. There was a story I wanted to tell you that we're coming together with. So there was a mission that was, so these other things that we talked about. There are these guys that you're trying to go after, and there are these guys that you're constantly telling the U.S. government, we need to get this guy, and here's why. And they're like, too dicey. Maybe it's in another country or whatever, And so these op plans, they travel between troops and squadrons. Just like, remember when Bo Bergdahl was kidnapped and held as a hostage, going to rescue Bo, that was constantly moving. There was always a troop that was responsible and staying up to speed on what are the conditions for us to go in and rescue Bo. That was one of those things, again, when it comes to the national will. It's like, hey, what's going to be the cost to go rescue this kid in Pakistan? And you're constantly having these discussions with the government on, hey, we think we can get him with these level of triggers, and those triggers just weren't met over and over and over. So there was this guy that we wanted to go after. He was running foreign fighters into Iraq, and the Bush administration finally said, "I've had enough. Go get this guy. Tell me how you're going to be able to do it, and tell me how you're going to be able to get away with it with me, the president, being able to deny that we ever did it." Right? Well, this op plan went and went and went and went and went and went. And then finally it lands on my plate. And, one of the requirements was it has to be deniable by the United States, and as an officer, I said, okay, President Bush said that last year. is this still a requirement? Do we still need to develop an op plan that we can deny? Like, that's hard. That's really, really hard. So for weeks, I tried to push it through my chain of command until finally it gets in front of George Bush. It says, "Hey, boss, is this still a requirement?" And he was like, "Oh, no, no. I want this guy gone. I want to say a message. I want to go into this country, and I want to send a message. You do not harbor terrorists, in this country, and I've had enough." So that was a completely different set of conditions now, which made my job a lot easier. And one of the things I'll never forget, as I'm establishing these triggers, if this, if this, if this, if this, it kept getting denied at the highest level. Is, oh, it's too risky, it's too risky, it's too risky. Because you certainly don't want to go into another country and miss the guy, right?
Right.
So one of the things that we thought of, and I don't remember if it was me or if it was the team that I was working with, we had this little line that said, "And there is no other viable intelligence that would make us think otherwise." So, and as soon as we added that line, the administration said, "Go." So it was one of those things, like trying to understand what is the reticence? What are people afraid of? What is the risk tolerance? You know what I mean? And how do I mitigate that risk? So I think I just arrived at the best answer. The officer is responsible to mitigate that risk. Part of that is knowing what your guys can and can't do, understanding what that risk truly is. Like, if you fail on this mission, is it going to harm the reputation of the United States of America? That's okay. But then you mitigate that risk to make sure you don't fail on that mission. So I answered it as I was answering it. I think risk mitigation is the biggest thing that that the officer does. And that is not a passive thing. That is, you need to fight every fucking day you're in the Delta Force. And when we're at war, you need to be bringing it to our enemies every single day. So I think when people think about risk and think about risk mitigation, no, man. There's always a way to get past it. It's train harder. It's train better. Get a new piece of kit, integrate this, find out that. And one of the things that I teach a lot of is, in the military decision-making process, there's things we call facts and assumptions. And the job of the officer is to take things that are in the assumption file, on your list of assumptions, and try to move them over to facts. You get what I'm saying? So it's like, oh, we don't know if he's there. We think he's there. Okay, well, confirm that he's there. So my job now isn't to go get him. My job is to get that thing out of the assumption pile into the facts pile. Yes, he's there. He's there right now. We've understood a pattern of life. We expect him to be there next Tuesday in this time window. You see how this is very, very different when someone goes, "Well, we just don't know where he is." Well, that's not risk mitigation. Find out where he is. Find out what his pattern is. Get one step ahead of him so he walks into your trap. And to me, you can see me getting excited, right? Because that is what the officer does, is you set those traps and you set those conditions. So when your guys come in, they win every time.
That is, again, I hate to say it's epic too many times, but that's great. But okay, so that makes perfect sense. You laid that out great for an officer. When you're now in your officer role and you're evaluating guys on the assault team, guys that are going to actually be laying the breach, shooting people in the face, whatever it might be, in your mind and your experience as Jeff Tiegs, what qualities are you looking for in the guys that are on the ground coming off the helos, whether it's the Baghdadi raid or whatever it is? What qualities do you want in those guys?
Yeah, man, there's a list and a list and a list. But I tell you, what the thing that keeps popping into my head is fearlessness. Like, they have to have zero fear. And once again, this isn't some how do you get to a place where you don't have fear? It's because you've done it and you've trained on it and you've perfected it, and the day you're doing it in combat, it's just like, in the Super Bowl. Do you think that quarterback on 4th and 10 that they decide to go for it, that he has fear? No, he has no fear. they've run the plays, he knows the plays, and he's focused on getting it done. And that's what I was always looking for in our team leaders. And you would see it, you could see it build, right? Like you'd get a new guy. So the new guys that came across the hall, they were confident and they were capable, but there was still that unknown, so I'm using fear and unknown almost kind of some respectively. And as they got integrated into the team and into the troop and into the squadron, that fear would go away. Even we were talking about SEALs a little bit. I had a rotation in Iraq where I had two Navy SEAls from SEAL Team 6 get integrated into us and work with us. Hugely capable dudes. I mean, absolutely capable guys. But there was a little bit of a reticence initially when we started. And my job and the team leader's job was to make them feel comfortable. And it's like, no, this is the way we do it, and that's okay. And I think part of that when I'm talking about fear is that freedom for them to make decisions. When that helicopter hit the ground and dudes started to assault, or that tailgate opened and dudes began to assault, they had to know whatever decisions they made, I was backing them. You know what I mean? So it isn't just fearlessness of the fight. It's the fearlessness of, look, I'm trained and people trust my decision making and whatever I go with. And that was one of the biggest things that I saw when I worked with SEALs and they became integrated. They literally were like, oh, we can do this. And I'm like, yeah, if you think it's the right thing. Oh, hey, can I do this? It's like, hey, if you think it's the right thing, so it was, I don't know what their structure, I didn't work with them that much, but the Navy officer structure and NCO structure is crazy compared to the Army officer structure, So I think helping guys be confident in their own capabilities, and knowing that if something went wrong, man, I wasn't bringing out the blame Thor 5000 and blasting them in the face. That was something that we would eat together.
I'm so happy you said it. I interviewed 3 guys probably 2 years ago at this point, former Delta operators, and they said one of the best things about being in Delta is, when it comes time to pull the trigger, you're not going to get second guessed. And he's like,
Yeah.
if you're just, in some other random unit and anything goes wrong, you might hesitate because you don't want to get in trouble. You don't want your commanding officer to get in trouble. And they were like, if we decide it's time to start shooting, nobody is going to tell us don't do it, whatever it might be. And that is fascinating that you just brought up practically the exact same thing. On that note, is it different? Are the rules of engagement different at a tier 1 level when you're on like patrol, but if you're hitting a target, like I know this was after you were out, but it's just a good example of the Baghdadi raid. Like when they go to that compound, is it assumed that if you're a fighting age male and you're in that compound and you have not surrendered, as soon as you get the opportunity, are you considered a legitimate threat at that point? Or do they have to actually see an AK and get shot at before they're allowed to engage on a high value target?
Yeah, to answer that simply, my understanding was always our rules of engagement were never any different than anyone else's. It came to that level of interpretation, right? Like you're talking about. Now, one of the things that I know we did painstakingly is this is that game, man. You're pulling out some stuff that I haven't ever talked about, and I keep trying to make sure I'm not like giving away trade secrets, right? Like the last thing I want is some dudes are like, you can't talk about that, So there's 2 things. One is when we would put a mission up. So you have the rules of engagement, and you'd have the lawyers, and they can, and we'd go over what we can and can't do. And then when we would write a mission, we would say in that mission, the mission is to capture or kill so and so. And if it was capture/kill, it meant the mission was to capture that guy. If he fights or we feel threatened, then we have permission to kill him. And sometimes it was kill capture. And that was one of those things that, especially as the wars went on, when there was more and more oversight and they became more of these police actions, you know what I mean? And people would question, why did you kill that guy? Because he had an AK, but he didn't aim it at you. Yeah, I don't care. Like, I'm not a cop. He picked up an AK, that kind of thing. So we would the mission statement would be very specific. And I remember one time as a troop commander, I had the squadron commander named Tim, who was just a remarkable leader. And we had talked about going after this guy, and it was capture, kill, capture, kill. And I played a little slick Rick game because we really wanted to kill the guy. And I passed the op up for approval, and it was kill, capture. And I really was trying to like slip it by him, where it's like, hey, you said we could kill him, because now when it's kill, capture, it like that guy doesn't, like, you're going in to kill him. Like, what doesn't matter what the conditions are. You've been approved that this guy has already demonstrated he is a lethal threat. You know what I mean? And I remember one time passing up on, I'm a little embarrassed about it. I wonder if Tim remembers this, where, I passed it up and the mission was kill, capture. And he was like, I thought we've been talking about capture, kill. Now you want me to approve a kill mission? And I was like, oh, that must be a typo. You know what I mean? So, but he caught it. So there, it wasn't just rules of engagement. There was always a discussion on who are we going to kill intentionally? Who are we prepared to kill? And I think that surgical capacity that we have is not appreciated by the military, or I mean by the nation. You know what I mean? Like, the beauty of what we do is we don't hurt civilians. We don't hurt innocents, And let me just tie this back to one other thing, because I was, as we're jumping around, again, that role of that officer, that same mission that I was talking about, that we got past at the highest levels. One of the concepts of the operation had us swimming across this flooded river, and that was approved. And some people were saying, hey man, this is already approved, just go with it. And as the officer, I said, no, like, we don't have the equipment. Like, here we are in Iraq. We don't have fins. We don't have life vests. We haven't been doing swimming training. I mean, like, we are not, as Delta Force, prepared to swim this rapidly moving river without the right equipment. And oh, by the way, if there's any failure, guess what's 200 meters down the river? A guard shack with bad guys that are waiting for us. You know what I mean? So that was this precipitation where, on one hand, it was like, are you telling me? I remember my boss, are you telling me this Delta Force troop is not prepared to do this operation? And I'm like, yes, that's what I'm telling you. We are not prepared for us to jump in this river and swim across with all this gear. Like, give us a couple days to at least rehearse it and practice it. What's the rush? This guy's been on the target list for 3 years. Give me another day or two. And in that day or two of that prep was when I finally said, do we even need to swim the river? Does it need to be this secretive? Can't we just fly in and kill this guy? What does the president say? And now we're full circle with that last story.
That is, I'm hanging on every word you're saying. When I interviewed
I
Todd,
hope that the listeners are digging it. I don't know. Yeah.
Oh, I guarantee you they will. They're going to eat this up. When I interviewed Todd Opolsky, he made a comment that I found very, very fascinating. I'd love to get your opinion on it. He said that when it comes to the basics, whether that's shooting, tactics, whatever it might be, he is, in his life, has never seen someone so good at the basics as a Delta Force assault team is. Across the line. He said it's machines in action over and over and over again. What is your opinion on his assessment?
Hands down, and I would say the same about any good organization. If you're running sports analogies or not, or even in the military with the Rangers, Special Forces. I remember a friend of mine, even the name Special Forces, it's because you have general missions and you have special missions. Like, that's where Special Forces came from. It's like, these are out of the ordinary, not general military operations. But he really said, man, we should have called ourselves guys that do the basics really fucking well forces. Like, because Special Forces, really, it just has this weird connotation. One, that you're better than everyone else, or two, you know what I mean? But it's just the basics. But the interesting thing that I would admit to people is your basics get piled on, though, right? Like, lying in the prone with your weapon supported and squeezing the trigger and hitting the black dot. That everyone starts there, right? Those are the basics. But the basics end up becoming running and shooting. You know what I mean? Like your basics become more than just the basics. It's like I'm a jujitsu guy. It's like a black belt in jujitsu. You still do the basics better than everyone else, but your basics are way more sophisticated. So while I would agree with that assessment wholeheartedly, it's a little bit of a game, right? Like, um, yeah, our basics aren't your basics. We started where you started, and that's the beauty of the unit too. Like you know, when you go to selection, they have a class on wearing boots. They teach you how to tie your boots. They teach you how to carry your feet. They teach you how to wear a rucksack. So you start at those basics, just like I'm talking when you're finishing the operator training course and you're literally running at full speed, hitting targets 20, 30 meters away on the run. You didn't just get there. You started at the basics. So yes, I agree. But does that make sense? Like
It makes perfect
you're a
sense.
black belt. It's like, you know, it's like a UFC fighter or a fighter. Like you're doing the basics. You're blocking, you're jabbing, you're hooking, you know what I mean? But you just do it with more precision. You do it faster, you know.
I just have a couple more questions on Delta, and then we're going to hop into some other parts of your life here. But I really want to keep digging into this because this has been wildly not just entertaining, but incredibly informative. One of the things I think people get a perception of who watch maybe a lot of movies or spy shows is that there's always these moments where like the world's going to blow up in 5 minutes and then a red phone rings somewhere, the phone gets picked up, and then a top secret, ghost team dispatches and save the world. Does stuff like that ever actually occur where the calls are that close? Or is that just kind of a figment of Hollywood's imagination that we're just constantly picking up the phone to save the world?
Yeah, so I would say yes and no, right? So if you're doing your job right, you're leaning forward on all these things. You know, like you're hearing the grumbling, and you're seeing the people the people move. You know, it's like 9/11 when that happened, everyone was like, "What the hell?" Just like what happened with Israel. It's like, what the hell? How did we miss all of this planning? So usually you're seeing the planning and you're hearing the planning, and you're prepared, or you're starting to pull threads out of it before it even happens. That's the state of things, you know. But it's also a haystack, right? And one of the things that I always get frustrated with, just like with 9/11 and just like what happened with Hamas coming out of Gaza and invading Israel, people are like, why didn't they see this? Why didn't Man, because you're dealing with thousands and thousands and thousands of pieces of information, you know, and some of them have more veracity than others. You know, you have to triage what it is we're going to keep, what it is we're going to look at, so there's just so much information that you're constantly trying to stay on top of. So when they do get the jump on you, though, and something happens, then it does happen. You know, like when you're in the unit, you're on a rotation where you're on alert, and you need to be within an hour of the building. So, you know, you live that way. You know, you're standing there watching your kid soccer, and you're constantly ready to be called in. And you're usually called in for some response of something we didn't expect, right? You know, somebody attacked something, somebody did something, a hostage was taken, that type of deal. So you do live that life, and you practice that life. So you practice it a lot more. You know, like I've been talking about that practice and rehearsal. So we were constantly getting called in and making sure that we could hit these timelines. You know, so the standard, I think, is 4 hours. So from something occurring that we didn't expect and getting the phone call to being wheels up is 4 hours, and then practicing planning on the airplane and getting everything in motion that you need. So yeah, I can't think of it ever as dire as the movies. Um, and yet you do live in a constant state of they could call me at any moment. Um, you know, I think one of the things, I don't know why this just popped into my head. Um, but you know, when that CH-47 went down, Chisel, I think it was called, no, Extortion, and all those Navy SEALs died. we were called in on an alert for that to support that organization. And it was a huge eye opener for us, because up until that event, you would be tasked with, hey, you're the casualty officer. So like, hey, if anyone gets hurt or anyone gets killed, you need to have your uniform ready. You need to understand, you're on call to go anywhere in the country to go talk to that family. Well, like that was one guy's job. And then when extortion went down and it's 30 different people, that now became an additional duty of mine. I always had my uniform ready. I always had a bag packed just in case we went through some sort of mass casualty event where every single officer in the building now had to deploy and go talk to families. So I think it's more like that than the ticking time bomb. It's like, hey, get to Washington and brief these guys. Hey, get to such and such in place and talk to this ambassador. That type of deal.
Do you what happens if a guy gets selected? Maybe he's been on, I talked to Chili Palmer about this a little bit. A guy gets there, maybe he's a great operator, but he's got personality conflict issues. He crushed it in OTC, crushed it in selection, maybe he's done a deployment, but he's really like there's problems outside of the combat. How easy is it? The way it was put to me is that it's the hardest job to get and it's the easiest to lose. Like, what's something that if you mess this up, you're gone? Like, is there stuff where there's a red line and if you cross it, no questions asked, see you later?
Yeah. I mean, we used to I think there was one term that we use. It comes is the three B's: booze, bucks, or broads. You know what I mean? And then drugs was the other one. The there are, like, when you're talking about recreational drugs, cocaine and things like that, and marijuana, like that was you're out, period. But we did go through a period of time where guys were taking performance enhancing drugs, and it was because we were banged up, and you either get pulled off the line and you miss a rotation to Iraq or Afghanistan, or you figure out a way to heal. So that was one of those things that became contentious, where a guy was taking performance enhancing drugs so he could stay in the fight. So again, you're a leader, right? And you sit this guy down and you're like, look, you just had a urine test and you've got steroids in your system. What's going on? Now, if he's doing it because he wants big pecs, you know what I mean? Like, screw that guy. He's out of the unit. He shouldn't have been there in the first place. But if he's doing it because he feels the responsibility to get back out there with his mates and he doesn't see any other way but to kind of skirt the margins, that guy usually would do his penance. He would have to leave. We'd pull him off the line. He'd have to do his penance, and then he would come back. So there was a model when guys screwed up where you would go away for a year, or you would go away for a couple years, and you would fix whatever it was that you screwed up. You know what I mean? Most of the time it was relational stuff, or maybe a guy was, fell to alcohol or something like that, where we felt like that we were able to rehab them. So I felt like there was a decent process of recovery and grace. I think we could have improved upon that. Because again, I think we're just now beginning to come to terms with the toll that it took on guys mentally. Chronic pain is one of those things that until you experience it, you don't really understand how much it just warps your mind. So guys turning to alcohol, turning to drugs, turning to, just risky behavior, those are all very, very normal reactions to a life of war. I think we could have done better in understanding that. Now, I would to go back to your question, that guy who just didn't fit in, that was probably a bigger you're out. You know what I mean? But we also had a process where if he didn't fit in with your team or your troop or your squadron, we could move them around. They would get a fair shake. If we moved you from team to team to team, and each team is like, this guy's just a dick, or this guy doesn't get it, but I don't know of a single guy who was like one and done. If you were just kind of that strange personality but a good operator, there was usually a place for you.
Do the squad, because you're talking about moving guys around, do the squadrons, do they have kind of distinct personalities and culture, or is it So you're
Yeah.
shaking your head. Yeah. So what's kind of,
Yeah.
can you give a breakdown of like, in your opinion, what kind of separates them?
This is a weird one, dude. I mean, I would love to study this because the squadrons had their own personalities, the troops had their own personalities, and yet when you worked with them, it really didn't exist. Like one of the troop that I had before I got there, their nickname were the Rats on Acid because we hit everything hard. You know what I mean? It was the old number 6. Boom, we hit it. Speed, surprise, violence of action. Those are the 3 tenets of close quarters battle. That's what we did. Speed, surprise, violence of action. Every single one. That was our go-to. And we were just very aggressive. Everyone was like super fit. Not that these troops weren't, but there were troops that are a little bit more sophisticated and intellectual, like tactical questioning. There were troops that would spend a lot of time talking to the detainee and trying to get information. And we were just like, tell us what we want to know. He's not telling us on, we're moving on to the next one. So, when you, this is an interesting thing. When you come in as a leader, you're like, okay, this is interesting with officers because you're in and out. You do a couple years with each, with a unit, if it's a troop or a squadron or whatever. So you have to make that decision of who bends. Do I bend to their personality or do they bend to my personality? Or, can you suss out these things that are good or bad? Like are we too aggressive? So that was one of the things when I came in on that particular troop. It was like, okay, this troop is, man, their success rate is 99.9%. So whatever they're doing works. It seems awfully aggressive. It seems awfully violent, a little bit more than some of these other troops, but it's working. So when I come in as the leader of that organization, I'm not going to change anything. I'm just going to watch it. You know what I mean? And I'm going to have these open discussions with the team leaders and the other leaders and just say, hey man, this is the perception from the outside, or these are the things that I'm looking at. We need to be adult enough to recognize our own warts, our own sacred cows, and that type of thing. So that's $1 million question. There are distinct personalities in teams, in troops, in squadrons, and yet it's very, very difficult to pull it out and recognize it.
I have 2 questions left for you on the Delta front. One, and I'm going to ask this one first. I think this is a good one. When you look back at your career, is there any mission you can talk about that you say that I'm most proud of that? Like one that you're actually able to discuss when you look back, you're like, man, I'm so proud. Maybe even if I wasn't like the boss of it, I was indirectly involved. And I'm just from a historical standpoint or an effort, I'm just so glad that I got to be a part of that.
Wow. Yeah, I think probably the one that I'm most proud of is this one I keep talking about that had a presidential involvement, cross-border operation, and I can't talk about that one. And it wasn't just, like I said, the precision of it all and the mission accomplishment. It was really understanding, hey, this op had been on the go list for years, and we never got final approval. So really understanding the strategy and all of that. So that one stands apart. And then they just all kind of blend together. Oh, okay, there was one. Okay, yeah, there was one in Afghanistan where one of the biggest difficulties in Afghanistan was getting your opponent to fight. So anytime you had foreign fighters in Afghanistan or foreign fighters in Iraq, like, you knew it. They stood and fight. They were there to bang. But the Iraqis that lived there, the Afghans that lived there, man, they didn't want to die. You know what I mean? Like they didn't want to go up against us. So you constantly had to set these conditions where they thought they had the upper hand, you know? And so one of the times when I was in Afghanistan, I'm studying when the Afghans would attack. Like what was precipitating them to attack? And that was the thing. It was like, oh, vulnerabilities. And one of the things that I looked at was these Marines were in fields and they had 2 sniper positions that weren't supportable. They should have been. They thought they were, but they weren't. And the Afghans recognized that weakness, and they basically massed and enveloped these Marines and wiped them out. And I remember looking at that and being disappointed, A, the tactical mistake that the Marines made, B, the rules of engagement. So the Marines also didn't engage with these Afghans because the Afghans weren't showing the aggressiveness. You know, they had weapons on them, but they were just like, they were like circling them, you know what I mean, and surrounding them. And by the time the Marines felt like they had reached the rules of engagement, it was already too late. And I think it was 8 Marines that got killed. Um, and as Delta Force, one of the things in Afghanistan towards the end, we knew we weren't going to win that war. Like that, we weren't there to win the war in Afghanistan. We recognized that we had lost the national will. My job was to protect the soldiers and airmen and sailors that were on the ground, you know what I mean, in harm's way. And my other job was vengeance. You fuck with us, we're gonna fuck with you. And when those Afghans killed those Marines, I took that personally. You know, who do you think you are? You have the balls to do that? And this was in a faraway region in the northwest part of Afghanistan that we weren't even working. But I made it a point to say, we're gonna avenge those Marines. And I see what you did there, and we're gonna try to sucker you in to do it again. So we did just that. We hit a village, we got the people that we were going after, and then we did a false exfil. So we got on the CH-47 and we jumped off. So the enemy, the Afghans that were observing us, they saw us get on the helicopters, but they didn't see us get off. We jumped out of the doors with the miniguns on it, and then we scattered through the village and we hid, and we left a couple of operators on these rooftops, 2 sniper positions that could be observed. You know, they weren't like walking around, but it was like, hey, we know the Afghans, and we're monitoring what the Afghans are. They're talking on, you know, push to talk radios, you know, Radio Shack, you know, little handies. And they see our guys and they're communicating and saying, oh, hey, they left. And it looks like they left, you know, two-man teams behind. Let's go get them. And they replicated that same strategy that they did with the Marines a few weeks earlier. And they massed on us with motorcycles and vehicles, like by the hundreds. And we popped up out of the village, and it was a turkey shoot. And I'm proud of that because we recognized how they were fighting, and we beat them at their own game. I'm proud of that because the restraint, our guys waited until like the enemy was right on top of us. And we avenged those young Marines. So yeah, that one sticks out in my head as a huge success.
That's a brilliant trap. Like you're talking about laying traps. This is the last specific one to Delta Force. And this is the one I wrote down earlier in the interview when you said you had retired in 2015. There's a former operator I've written about on a handful of occasions. I write about him pretty much every Memorial Day for the last several years. His name was Joshua Wheeler. He was killed in 2015 on that famous ISIS raid when Thomas Patrick Payne earned the Medal of Honor. If you knew Joshua Wheeler at all, would you mind saying what your memories of him was and what kind of man he was? And if you didn't, not a big deal at all, but I figured maybe you two overlap given the timelines.
We did, and we overlapped at 2nd Ranger Battalion too. So I knew Josh when he was a young Ranger. And there are some of these guys that are just larger than life, right? Like, you know, a lot of the Delta guys are larger than life. Some of them are the ultimate gray man. I mean, Josh was one of those guys that was just larger than life. Like he did it a little bit better than everyone else. And he did it a little bit louder than everyone else. You know what I mean? It's like, but not loud like ego. He was just always having fun. Like he'd be laughing going through the shoot house. You know what I mean? He's laughing on target. I mean, I can almost guarantee you, I wasn't there. He was A squadron, same squadron that I was with. I wasn't there, but I can guarantee you there was laughter within somewhere happening in the middle of this, you know, where Josh going, can you believe this? You know what I mean? Like, let's get this, you know? Um, yeah, that one hurt a lot of guys. And I think a lot of guys are still emotionally and spiritually hurt over that one. I don't fully understand, you know, what's happening with our guys, where they're just, you know, they're killing themselves. They're committing suicide. And it really started in the military ranks, and then it's moved into soft, and it's starting to hit Delta. And it might be, I think I have some beliefs. I mean, what we don't lose that many guys, you know what I mean? And the other biggie though is this sense of control. I think trauma is very much tied to the lack of control. You know what I mean? So when you're a young soldier, that's why even these kids that have PTS that never were in a gunfight, it was just from mortars landing on the forward operating base. I don't dismiss that trauma because it's that lack of control. You know what I mean? And I never felt in the unit, well, ever really, that I didn't have a fighting chance. You know, it's kind of like even if it was a Butch and Sundance event, like when Butch and Sundance, you know, and that they run out and there's this Bolivian company, you know, like I think in their minds they're like, we got a fighting chance, you know, and I always felt that way, that we have a fighting chance. You know, I've never felt so far behind the black ball that I ever felt out of control or fearful. And that's one of the things that I know with Josh. There was never a moment that he just wasn't ready for the fight, you know. And Pat, when Pat came across the hall, his very first job was with me. I was his troop commander, and he was a highly talented, spot on kid, and it's interesting for me now to see this wise sage Medal of Honor winner Pat Payne, you know, where, man, we busted his chops for months as the new guy, you know. And the other thing I would say is, while that is a deserved honor for Pat, that handful of men that were around him and around Josh are equally as heroic, if not even more heroic. And those are names that you'll never know. And I would like to, you know, the listeners to this, man, say a prayer of thanks to these men and women, because a lot of us are retiring and retired now. If Pat isn't retired, he will be soon.
He's retired. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. You know, all that era of those guys, you know, they called them 9/11 babies. So when 9/11 started, for, you know, for 20 years, from 2001 and 2021, they were fighting, you know. And so those guys are starting to retire. And just, yeah, pray for peace, pray for shalom for these guys, pray for peace for a guy like Pat Payne. Carrying that Medal of Honor around your neck, that is a heavy lift.
Without a doubt. And to the viewers, the reason Joshua Wheeler has stood out to me, I remember where I was the day Joshua Wheeler got killed. I didn't know who he was. I had zero connection. I was sitting in the offices of my old job. I was sitting at a table in the middle of the room, and my buddy Neil was sitting right next to me. It was early in the morning, and MSNBC had flashed Joshua Wheeler's photo when he's in like his dress where he's got, you know, the medals and all that stuff. And they're like, a U.S. serviceman has been killed in Iraq. I turned to my buddy and I said, I guarantee you that guy's in Delta Force. Guarantee it. And at that time, there was no details. It was, this guy's been killed on what they think was a rescue mission, which obviously turned out to be true. And then the New York Times, I believe, wrote kind of an in-depth dive. And they said the last thing Joshua Wheeler ever said, because, you know, the Kurds were getting overrun, the mission was not going well, he turned to the guys behind him and he said, follow me, the Kurds behind him. And he stepped through that breach, and that's where he took that AK round that killed him. I believe it was an AK. And that level of bravery to turn and just say, follow me, that is American exceptionalism at its absolute best. And I hope everyone watching this knows who Joshua Wheeler is. If you don't, Google him. And Pat Payne and everyone, I mean, just class, you can't beat him.
And brother, those are the same Kurds I was talking about in 2002. You know, some of them are the exact same men. Some of them are their children. You know what I mean? This That was the thing that used to blow me away too, going back to Iraq and Afghanistan, is linking back up with these guys. And I've been back to Iraq since in the counter sex trafficking stuff. Um, they're still surviving, you know? So yeah, I agree with you. So yeah, I'll say it one more time, man. Say a prayer of thanks for men like Josh Wheeler and women like Josh Wheeler, because they fill our ranks. And this idea that George Orwell saying of, you know, brave men stand on these walls, that's why I sleep peacefully at night. That is no joke, people. There are people, there are men and women that are on these walls, and they will climb off that wall and go into bad guy country just so you can sleep well at night. And while sometimes we get resentful about it, and sometimes we feel unappreciated, every single one of us would do it all over again.
Amen. I now want to ask you a question as a Christian. You know, like I said, you wrote the book Where Have All the Heroes Gone, which, you know, the fact anyone can write a book to me is incredible. I don't think I could ever write a book, so that's wildly impressive. But as a Christian, one of the questions I find fascinating when I interview someone who's gone to war and is also a Christian, what do you say to people who might say, you can't kill people, you can't believe in combat, you can't go to war, and at the same time call yourself a follower of Christ? What would your response be to anyone who might suggest that?
If I was going to be flippant, I would say, did you ever read the Old Testament? And then the other piece of that too, and this is one of the things I'm working on a sequel. So we talk about the Old Testament, right? And then so you have the Old Testament, which is a lot of warfare. And then you have 400 years of silence. That's the thing. Between the last book of the Old Testament, the Old Covenant, and the coming of John the Baptist, 400 years went by, and God did not speak to his people. It was silence. So now he comes in, and all that New Testament piece, the Gospels with Jesus, is a handful of years. You know, so Jesus comes in to fulfill the violence that was necessary in the Old Testament, right? But then we keep forgetting, what does he point to? The entire Bible ends with the book of Revelation. And what happens in Revelation? War, violence, killing. So while this warrior king, prophet, priest named Jesus, Yeshua, is who we exemplify, and he didn't live a life of war, he's gonna. He says when he comes back, his robe will be drenched with blood. So I don't see these as competing ideas of life and death and violence and peace and grace. I see them all as one piece. And I would take that so far. My personal belief is we will all meet our creator. I don't understand this judgment piece. You know what I mean? Like when you die, I don't understand what exactly is death of the body and the mind and the soul. But I think you will have an opportunity to meet our creator, and you will make a decision if you follow him or not. So maybe people think of this as a cop-out, but for me, to end the life of a terrorist and give him the opportunity before he could do more bad things to stand before his creator and be given that option of, now do you get it? Because when you and I go to heaven, dude, there's things we got wrong, right? Like
Right.
what is my test score? 87%? You know what I mean? You've got a 92%. What we don't have is 100.
Right.
None of us have 100% on this test. So somewhere along the line, we're going to have to accept the things we got wrong and follow Yeshua, follow our creator, get on our knees and be accepted into this next kingdom. So how about that guy who's got a 6 on his exam? You know what I mean? He was nice to a puppy once. You know what I mean? Like why is he any different than me? You know, so that's why, I mean, in many ways, I believe the longer somebody lives in a life of violence and in a life of commitment to evil, I think it's harder to make that decision for eternity. So maybe this is a weird answer to some people, but if you're somebody who's bent on evil and I end this mortal life for you, in my mind, I'm doing you a favor because I'm ushering you into eternity where you have an opportunity to make a decision in front of your creator. And I pray that you choose well.
That is a very unique answer. I haven't heard that one before, but no, I think that it's an interesting argument. I love asking that question. I've never got a bad answer to it. I've never had anyone who failed to answer it or got caught up. Everyone kind of, over the years has thought about that. You can tell. Now I want to transition, do a little hard pivot here and do the sex trafficking stuff.
Yeah.
I got to be honest with you. I'm not an expert on that. I watch the
Yeah.
news. I see the stuff, obviously there's danger online, cell phones, the Epstein stuff is always talked about, et cetera, et cetera. What motivated you personally to want to get into the world where, okay, I went from Delta Force for hunting terrorists. Now I want to go after people who are targeting kids?
Yeah. So it's everything we've talked about. I love the hunt. I love setting the conditions. There's a reason it's called Skull Games. Bad guys are going to do bad guy stuff. Good guys are going to do good guy stuff, and I'm totally cool with that. The people that exhaust me are the in between, the gray guys, right? It's just like that Bible verse that says cold water and hot water. There's a reason for both, but that lukewarm water, we all spit it out, and that's the piece that exhausts me. So I clearly identify as a good guy, right? And as I'm moving towards retirement, looking for who's the next bad guy that I want to fight against, who's doing something that I think I have the skills that I've been trained with, and I can build teams to counter. I can step into their game and set the traps. I can step into their game and beat them at it. And it was a combination of things, but one of them very much being just a very quiet calling from God, that I felt that, I want you to address this. I want you to do something about this. And I didn't welcome it at first. This wasn't something I was interested in. And as I began to dig into it and really understand that I've worked with the men and women in the military that would be perfectly suited to combat this crime domestically and internationally, and the desire to really focus domestically. So when you talk about counter trafficking or anti-trafficking in the United States, we really are focused foreign. We're looking a lot at the labor trafficking. We're supporting countries to protect women and children. We're doing very, very little right here in the United States, and I'm hoping that will change. So what we've created is very much what it is we've been talking about: an intelligence apparatus, a support apparatus to get law enforcement to the right place at the right time with the right information to recover women and children that are being sexually abused and arrest their traffickers, their predators. So like I said, I feel like a special forces operator as much as I ever have. I wear a little black sweaty hoodie with the Skull Games now instead of a uniform, fatigues, and a green beret. And our host nation forces aren't Kurdish Peshmerga or Afghan commandos. They're law enforcement in the United States. They're police. They're beat cops. They're detectives. They're Homeland Security officers. And it really is an extension of that relationship on what it is. What do we have knowledge-wise, tech-wise, experience-wise that we can assist you? And because the crime lives online, it's an online commercial industry. We can see it everywhere, and we can hunt it everywhere, and we can be a force multiplier everywhere.
So this is why I'm curious about this, because are you using, I guess I'm trying to think of the words. It's not signals intelligence like radios, but what tools do you have at your disposal to pinpoint where these bad guys are?
Yeah. Oh, you're so close. So in addition to signals intelligence, SIGINT, we have human intelligence, right? HUMINT, which I don't believe there's a space for a civilian to be doing HUMINT in the United States. That's one of the tensions that have happened. When you see these counter-trafficking organizations that are getting in trouble, it's because they're doing HUMINT. They're doing human intelligence. They have humans that are underqualified, you know what I mean? And not just underqualified, but uncredentialed, doing police-like stuff, So signals intelligence, that is a Fourth Amendment right. So you've got to get a subpoena or warrant to collect somebody's signals, what's happening on their cell phone, what's happening on their computer. You have to be qualified and credentialed to do HUMINT, but there's another INT. It's called OSINT, open source intelligence. And that's what we focus on. So OSINT is also known as publicly available information. With the expanse of the internet and social media, people are willfully putting information on the internet that can be collected, and it's all open source. It's not protected by your Fourth Amendment rights because you are saying it. If I go to your Facebook or your Twitter or your Instagram, all of that locational data that you're putting out there, all of the things you're commenting on, that's open source. That's publicly available. So we focus on all of that to identify who these women are that are being abused and who's abusing them, because it's all sitting there on the internet already. You just need the time and the people and the techniques and sometimes the tools to gather all of that and package it up. And now what we're able to see in the open source internet is hopefully crossing that line of probable cause, reasonable suspicion. So now law enforcement can use SIGINT and they can get inside that person's cell phone or inside that person's messengers or however it is they're communicating. And now they see all the elements of the crime. So we're trying to get them from OSINT to SIGINT and trying to help them understand what it is they're looking at. We're building pattern of life. We're trying to help them understand where this person is going to be so they can interdict them, or the operation where they're calling that person in. You know what I mean? One of the things we do. Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
No. Please keep going. This is awesome.
So one of the other things that we help law enforcement out a lot is they will create these accounts on social media and they'll pretend they're a 12, 13, 14-year-old girl or boy, just innocently, and these men will begin to friend them and talk to them and communicate to them. And then they'll begin to start talking about sex. And do you want to meet for sex? So it happens at such a rapid scale. If you and I did this experiment, if you and I from Jump Street created a Facebook page or an Instagram page or a TikTok or whatever, and got some photo and pretended we were a 13-year-old girl, dude, before the end of this podcast, we'd have 100 men soliciting us to meet them for sex. You know what I mean? So who are they though? Because even though it's open source intelligence, there are ways that we mask and hide our identities, right? So maybe the guy's Jeff Tiegs, but his email or his call sign on social media is, whatever, Skull Games or, Jackhammer. This is Jackhammer, so who's Jackhammer? Jackhammer is soliciting a minor for sex, but who is he? And there's so many of them that we try to help law enforcement identify who they are. So, if Jackhammer is a previous sex offender, oh, we want that guy. If Jackhammer is a coach of a girls softball team, oh, we want that guy. If Jackhammer is a 17-year-old boy who's soliciting a 14-year-old girl, he gets a pass. You know what I mean? Because we can only call in so many guys in one operation. So that's the other thing that we're helping is protecting these kids online on who these true identities are. And same thing when you see a woman that's being sold online on these escort ads, she has a fake name. And the person that's controlling her has a fake name. What's interesting is it's just like the Mooj that we were talking about. Zarqawi. What was his name? Yeah, Abu. I forget what it is. But they all go by Abu. They all had street names.
Oh, you talking about Baghdad? You talking about Baghdadi?
Abu al-Baghdadi. Yeah. So Abu al-Baghdadi. But Zarqawi, Abu Kaswan. I can't remember what Zarqawi's name was. We all know him as Zarqawi. But most of these guys had street names. I may offend some people, but it's kind of like Snoop Dogg or Ice Cube. Like all these bullshit rapper names are because it's cool in the criminal world, right? Like I can't be Jeff Tiegs and sell drugs. I got to be J Mac or Snoop J or J Ice or whatever the fuck I'm going to come up with. You know what I mean? I'm not saying all the, you get what I'm like. Yeah. We can't be so naive that we don't understand what's happening, because every pimp, every trafficker has a name like that. It's not his real name. It's pimp daddy or whatever, whatever, Daddy J, tons of money, hustle and flow, whatever the fuck he's calling himself. So he's naming his girls something that they're not, because they need to obfuscate who they are, and they need to build the fantasy in the whole sex trade, and then they're hiding who they are. So if you spend a little bit of time on the open source internet, we can find out that Eminem is Marshall Mathers, and this is who he is, and this is what he does. You know what I mean? And it's the same exact game.
If I'm a parent and let's say I have a 13 or 14-year-old child, are there any warning signs I can be on the lookout for to be like, hey, don't be doing this, or if something's going on, this is a red flag? Like, what are some indicators that should put the antenna up?
Yeah. So one of them, we used to say this thing in the military: if it looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, and walks like a duck, it's probably a duck. Okay. So we've got to get beyond this political correctness. If your daughter's boyfriend talks and acts like a pimp, he might be a pimp. Like they're not hiding who they are. You know what I mean? Because it's a competition, you know what I mean, where they're constantly recruiting and demonstrating, their capacity. They're pretty brazen about who they are and what they do. So even if he's not a pimp, if that's what he exemplifies, if that's what he's like, if he's looking for, man, don't let your daughters date these assholes. You know what I mean? Like I don't, again, how do you do that as a parent? How do you step in? Because the girl's looking for the bad boy, that kind of thing. It's difficult. But the other one I would definitely say is the control factor. And I this is the one when I tell this people all the time. If you have a daughter who has a significant other, and that person is isolating your daughter and controlling your daughter, at best, that's just a bad relationship, right? At worst, that's a bad human being ready to exploit your daughter. Because if your daughter loves dance, or she loves soccer, or whatever it is she loves, maybe she loves you, maybe she loves her auntie, maybe she loves her grandma, that person that's in her life should want to double down on that, right? He should encourage her. Do more soccer. See your grandma more. You know what I mean? Do more time with horses, because that he recognizes that that's part of her personality, and he doesn't see that as a threat. So again, it could just be a young man who lacks confidence, and he thinks it's her relationship with you is a threat, or her love for soccer is a threat. Okay, that's just that's a lack of confidence young man. Again, he's not necessarily a bad person. But even that guy, if he starts taking action to isolate your loved one, fuck that guy. Get him out of your daughter's life. And slowly but surely, you'll begin to identify what their real motives are. Because all these guys, they start out looking like a boyfriend. They come in wolves in sheep's clothing. And that's what we're trying to do, is reveal the wolf on his persona online that you don't necessarily see.
When it comes to social media, would you recommend that a parent not let, a 15-year-old get on TikTok or Instagram or Facebook? Because like you said, if we create a Facebook right now, we get 100 messages before this is even done. That to me seems like an easy, like non-starter. Like if you're a kid, maybe you shouldn't be on social media.
I mean, the answer to that is yes. If you're a kid, you shouldn't be on social media, but that's a tough sell, right? And I think parents just need to be very, very open, and explain to their children the evils that exist. On Discord, on Roblox, on these things that kids think are safe, where it's other children. If it touches the internet, there's a creepy old dude communicating with the child. So if your kid doesn't care about TikTok that much, then encourage them to stay off of it. I think that's a hard sell with a lot of people. One of the things I encourage is having that open communication with your son or daughter. With our sons, it was, hey, whatever accounts you have, I want you to create one for me and friend me. So at least I can get the tone, right? I can understand the atmospherics of what's being said. If your kid has a private account or a secret account and they're not telling you, there's not much I can do about that. But communicating and just being in the open. So that's my number one. is understand what sites your children are on, educate them to those dangers, and ask them to create an account for you and friend you. And then at least that way, maybe you see a predator coming in. Maybe you're seeing a trend line that you don't like. And I think that's reasonable. Searching your kids' phones and keeping them off of social media, I think that's just kind of unreasonable and unrealistic. But having open communication and helping educate them on what it is. And I think especially young girls, they don't understand how predatory men are in general. Even a nice guy, like even a nice guy is trying to get in your pants, right? Like it's just, we all were there, right? Like I've been married for 35 years. I'm still trying to get into my wife's pants every day. You know what I mean? That's just, it's who we are. But now to be manipulative and predatory and controlling, that's just not good. So I think helping them understand and recognize that that's just the way the world is nice. And that's also the reason why when you talk about commercial sex trafficking, there's not a huge market for a 12 or 13-year-old girl. That's a small market, right? That's a weirdo. The younger you get, that's a weirder, that's a niche market. But these girls that are 13, 14, 15 years old, they're now exploring their own sexuality. They're exploring their own independence, and they're physically mature enough for a guy to pretend he didn't know, you know what I mean? Or to lure her in and sell her and say that she's 18. So this market that these traffickers are looking for of 13 to 17-year-old girls is really, really a huge market. It's really where they're spending a lot of time hunting. Again, not because the market is a minor. The market is a pretty young girl who's just naive enough to not understand what's happening until it's too late.
Oh, that is infuriating on so many different levels. But hey, I give you all the credit in the world for stepping up and doing something. I know, a lot of people I feel like have been woken up to the issue maybe over the past few years. And that's good because obviously if we can't protect children, then what are we doing at a bare minimum, right? All right. Last question. This is the one that everyone knows what's coming who watches this, so this won't be a shock to anyone. I ask it to every tier 1 guy who's ever appeared on the show. Delta Force versus SEAL Team 6. You obviously come from Delta. There's been a lot of SEAL Team 6 guys on the show. In your opinion, what's the significant differences between those two units, and which one do you think is better? You are allowed to say whatever you want during this segment. There's no rules.
The two biggest things, it starts with culture. Okay. And one of the first discussions I ever had when I was in the unit as a leader, it was the discussion of because we come together with the SEALs and the SAS, and we have discussions about how do we do things better? What did you learn? It's called cross briefs. I think it's once a year. I think maybe twice a year. I think it's once a year where everyone comes in and you learn from each other and you learn from the trends. Again, hey, we got guys taking performance enhancing drugs because they want to get back in the fight. Well, the SEALs have guys that are taking performance enhancing drugs because they want to be Billy Badass. But the question is, you're recruiting Billy Badass from Jump Street. You're looking for this young, brash, PT stud. He's not being really rated heavily on his intelligence or his emotional intelligence or any of his sophistication. So, like, why are you surprised now that that's what this guy is? And especially if you're not developing that, and we had those discussions back when, and I still think it's happening, where SEALs are writing books and making movies and all that. Now, the irony is, here I sit, right? I'm a Delta guy talking about Delta. I got a book behind me. And there are guys in the unit that think this is really, really wrong. We should not be doing that. And on many, many levels, like 8 out of 10 levels, I agree with them. We are the quiet professionals. We should not write books. We should not talk about what it is that we do. Again, that's 80%. Then there's the 10% but somebody's got to know. Like how do we continue to bring in the right people, and have the leaders in our country understand and recognize who we are. as an officer, going back to full circle, one of the things we did was we traveled around and briefed people in Washington and ambassadors and even other military leaders who we are and what we do. If you're so secretive, no one even knows who you are and what you do, that's a hindrance, you know? And I think I say 10%, it's probably less than that, because we have military leaders now. We have a lot of high-ranking officers that were in Delta Force. You know, I'm not going to name them, you know, but I'm going to bet within the next one or two, what is the guy of the Army called? The guy that's in charge of the Army, or the chiefs of staff or whatever, the chief, I don't know. I forget what they called. It's going to be a Delta guy. You know, so we've done a better job of telling people who we are and what our capabilities are. I'm flipping around a little bit for you. So like, as an example, I was in a briefing about the Saddam Hussein capture that someone didn't know Delta Force did it. Like they thought it was 4th ID, the 4th Infantry Division capture Saddam Hussein. And it's like, on one hand, that's super cool. We pat ourselves on the back. No one even knows we did it. But on the other hand, it's like, how do people not know we did it? Like, how do you think 4th ID pulled this off, or these other things that as we've talked about? So I think there's a capabilities and mindset and culture that we need to talk about. And that comes back to culture. I'd never want to share TTPs, tactics, techniques, and procedures that would put guys at risk. I don't want to share things that are secret, but I do want to give a little bit of insight into who we are and who the men and women are from that organization, what makes us tick, what makes us different. And part of that is that culture. And then, of course, you've read my book. There is a different purpose for my book. I'm trying to share the faith groundings that kept me stable. And I'm not thinking about killing myself. You know, I'm not having a bunch of PTS issues. I think a lot of that goes back to my faith. And then, yeah. And then, so part of that is reaching these guys and that are struggling. I hope if my book helps one guy stay alive another day, it's worth it to me, you know. But the flip side of that is I certainly don't want the haters who are like, Teags, piece of shit, wrote a book. Delta Force guys don't write books. There is that group out there, and I hope over time I can win them over on that. So part of it is hugely culture. The other part of it is just a math game. Okay, so SEAL Team 6, their ranks are filled by Navy SEALs. So I'm just going to estimate, I could be wrong, someone can Google this, 5,000 SEALs in the Navy. So out of 5,000 people, you are invited to come to SEAL Team 6. There's no selection. You're just invited to come because I know you and I vouch for you for being a good guy. And then your selection is the training pipeline. So they weed guys out through our OTC. Okay. But there's no selection. Delta Force starts with a selection. And oh, by the way, we recruit from the entire Department of Defense, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard, Reserve, National Guard. So SEAL Team 6 is drawing from a pool of maybe 5,000 guys at the most. We're drawing from a pool of, what is that? 1 million people?
Yeah, 1 million.
So now, again, like when you watch the Olympics, right? And you're like, why is Russia and the United States and China always so good? Because we have millions of people, you know, and this is our focus. And then every once in a while you have Djibouti rise up on the World Cup. And same thing, you're like, how the hell did Djibouti get 11 guys better than the American soccer team? You know, so there are statistical anomalies. But when you look at this, we are drawing from such a huge pool of people from varied interests and varied professions and varied experiences. And they go through a selection process and this whittling and a training process, and they come out a Delta Force operator. Whereas the SEAL teams are already taking this very homogenized individual who's already been indoctrinated into the SEALs, who thinks like a SEAL, acts like a SEAL, walks like a SEAL, barks like a SEAL. And now they're trying to create something that is slightly different, a little bit more sophisticated, a little bit more mature and comfortable in the gray. Very, very hard to do.
That's a very good answer. I have something I'm going to tell you. I'll tell you a story that I heard from someone from your team when I hit the stop recording button, but here
Okay.
momentarily. But Jeff, this was awesome. I can't thank you enough. Could you tell people real quick where they can find you if they're
Yeah.
interested in getting your book,
Yeah.
finding out about Skull Games, just general info of where they can find you?
Yeah. And again, I unabashedly say the number one thing we lack in Skull Games is funding. I did not create wealth in life. Not monetary wealth. I created experiential wealth. And when I got out in 2015, I thought marrying my experiential wealth with actual like financial wealth would be a very, very easy thing. Very, very difficult thing to do. So if people are remotely interested in protecting women and children domestically in the United States, we identify women and children that are being sold, we interdict this crime, and we empower victims, and they turn around and become hunters with us. So you can take a look at our numbers, what we've been able to accomplish. Skullgames.io is our website. We have donation there. You can buy swag there. You can access some courses. We have a Protect Your Family course. And actually, but when we go, I'll give you a coupon for Protect Your Family. So anyone who listens to this, they can get online. They're going to hear more of me talking, but it's going to be very, very specific about what sex trafficking looks like in that exploitation cycle. So when we close, any of your listeners can access it and get a free coupon. There's a leadership course there that I talk about some of these old principles that we do. So all that can be at skullgames.io. But honestly, if you, man, I'm the founder and president, and there's 4 of us that are full-time, and the rest we have 400 volunteers, this task force of just ass-kicking hunters around the country. About 20 of them are our cadre. If every dollar we're putting it straight in. So skullgames.io to donate there. If you're interested in my book, it's on Amazon. You can go to my website. It's jefftiegs.com or wherehavealltheheroesgone.com. You can find my book there. Their audio is there. And reach out to me. I mean, I'm surprised. This was a labor of love. It really started out as my own kind of journey in the Bible and finding these new stories and really thinking about what they meant to me and how they were applied to my life and putting it in book form. I wasn't sure if it would resonate with people, but people are digging it, man. So I'd love for people to pick it up and let me know what they think. But yeah, skullgames.io. January is Human Trafficking Awareness Month and Prevention Month. January 11th is the day. And we kind of have this theme. We're all kind of fatigued. Like this is 8 years now I've been in this fight, since 2015. And it's kind of like we talked about, tie a yellow ribbon around the street post to honor the soldiers that are fighting. It's like once a month, we're going to pretend we give a fuck about sexual exploitation of women and children in America, So I really want to see things turn around. And I've committed another 8 years. I'm 54 years old. I'll work till I'm 62, and then I got to hand it off to somebody else. So it has been a hard, slow grind. And every single step of the way, the biggest gap is just funding. So if someone's out there who really feels a heart to protect women and children, or even a vindictiveness to put these assholes behind bars, what are our numbers? 73 arrests last year, and we've only been around for 6 months. I've been working with different organizations. We branched out on our own this past June. So since June till Christmas, we put 73 people away behind bars. Our biggest conviction was 249 years one guy got. So
good for you.
If you want to strike back against these traffickers, reach out. We got something for you.